Here's Mark and Suzanne revolutionizing radio.
Well, good morning and welcome to another episode of the Mark and Suzanne Show. I am Mark. She is Suzanne, and boy, do we have a lively show planned for you today. I'm glad you joined us, and you joined us because you are indeed interested in revolutionizing radio. You are, like us, tired of the status quo approach to politics, the status quo approach to living with each other. We know you're tired of the Rush Limbaughs and the Sean Hannitys and all the other major status quo talk show hosts out there, and that's why you joined us, because indeed, folks, radio does need revolutionizing. And we're going to start that process today. You know, here on the Mark and Suzanne Show, we are not afraid to gore sacred cows, because sacred cows actually do need to be gored right now. If we're ever going to have a chance at freedom, if we're ever going to be free of our masters in Washington, D.C., it begins with actually exploring ideas of how to get free. And that is what our show has been about for a long time now. That's why our audience continues to grow, because people are tired of the status quo. They know it leads to only bad things. Folks, this is why we're here. I'm Mark. She is Suzanne. Suzanne, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. I'm delighted. I'm looking at our screen. We've got a full cyber house here. Jeff Johnson is manning the controls. Thank you very much, Jeff, for all you do. Greg Junkbond Carpenter, the host of our shows here, Liberty Minutes. I will encourage you to check those out. Thank you, Mark. And then we have a special guest joining us. I'm going to bring him on momentarily. Marcus Ruiz Evans from Yes, California, part of the Cal Exit movement. I met him at the Dallas event. The Abbeville Institute hosted a symposium on nullification and secession. We've been promoting that for some time. At that event, I had the extreme pleasure of meeting him, as well as my co-host for the first time. Mark and I have been doing radio for 2 years, and we finally met face-to-face. What an amazing event it was. Mark, not only did you get to meet me, but we got to meet the people we've been hanging out with on the internet for so long. Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center, an extremist, by the way, according to the Think Progress article, Casey Michelle. When our founding principles become labeled extremist, we've got a real uphill battle. I want to encourage people to follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. We put up banners for live streaming also on Radio Co. You can listen to our shows 24 hours a day. We have the Shift Gold podcast with Mike Meharry. Gold investments is another way to hedge your bets with a very troublesome economy based on a system of fiat currency. Especially, I joined him actually last week. I think the show will be released today. We talked about preparedness, because there's a crossover. People that are interested in buying gold are doing it for a reason, not just because it's pretty. It's not going to be easy. If we are successful in our mission here to decentralize, secede, nullification issues, it's not going to be easy. So those of us that not only understand the proper role of our government, our founding principles, and what they really do enable us to do rather than prohibiting us to do, as well as those that can be prepared to get through and weather these difficulties. It will not be a seamless change, but if you're prepared, we can make it that much easier. So that being said, Mark, let's bring Marcus into the show. I'll let you do the introductions.
Yeah, I'll tell you, this last weekend was completely inspiring, as Suzanne and I and 100 plus others. And by the way, Marcus, I do have the exact number of how many people were there. Attended a conference in Dallas, Texas. It was a conference on the revival of nullification, interposition, and secession as a discussion topic. And it was a lively weekend. We had the privilege, Don Livingston, my good friend and editor of the book, Rethinking the American Union for the 21st Century, invited Marcus out to this event. And I was so glad Marcus took the bait and came. I think there was some trepidation on his part coming out to see us, and because we've been taught to hate each other. And I think he received and we received a warm welcome from his side, and he received it from our side. So without much further ado, I want to introduce the audience to Marcus Ruiz Evans. He is the president of Cal Exit. This is the effort that we talk about a lot on our show here. They are leading the way in rethinking the American Union for the 21st century, as Don Livingston has encouraged us to do. They are seeking to separate from the Union and become an independent nation. Now, I'll let Marcus speak to some of this, but folks, I want you to know this is a very serious effort. You need to know that that economy out there is a $2.3 trillion economy. They don't need us. They could survive well and flourish out there on their own. And I totally support their effort, 100%. I've backed their effort from the very first moment I heard it, because they actually need to lead the way, because when they accomplish their goal and they are free, others will be free as well. So, Marcus, why don't you give us a little bit of a background of KLX and how you got involved, and what is it? What is the final goal? Even though I tipped the hat a little bit there, what is the final goal in the process you guys are working through?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for allowing KLX to come and speak to, a Central America, Midwest conservative radio show, and giving us the chance to be able to speak. Thank you very much. I also want to say thank you to the Abbeville Institute and specifically Professor Livingston for inviting us to do the same. And all of this conversation comes from the idea that specifically, yes, California pursued. We're pursuing Cal Exit. And while others may see that as extreme, we view it as highly required. Things are not working. California needs to be prepared to have a lifeboat for further American disintegration or whatever happens. So Calix is talking about full-blown secession. California wants to become fully independent as a nation, much like I think around 210 nations right now. This isn't a gimmick. This isn't a ploy to get media. We've been at this for years, and 1/3 of Californians, or a population of 40 million people, according to multiple opinion surveys from Reuters, Ipsos to Stanford University, have shown are fully interested in secession, not let me think about it, maybe, I'm not sure, but 1/3 of a population of 40 million has already said, let's go, today. I don't need more discussion. Additionally, not reported in the liberal news. Yes, I'm a liberal. It brings me no pleasure in saying this, but the liberal news will not report a fact, which is that the Reuters Ipsos poll in January 2017 and the Stanford Hoover Policy Institute poll in January 2017 showed 46 to 47.5. That's 46 to 47.5% of Californians were open to discussing secession. The news only prints 1/3 of Californians wanted secession, inferring that 2/3 must be against it. They will never print that two different polls from highly reputable agencies showed a 17 to 15.5% amount of the public who additionally, on top of the third, said, I'm willing to think about this. So that means we're talking about just under half of California's population was willing to discuss secession. Reuters, Ipsos, Stanford Hoover, January 2017, GQ magazine's the only one to ever print that. Oh, and every foreign reporter we ever talked to, but no American reporter will print it. You can infer why that happens. I'm not sure. I thought this was a free and fair and balanced democracy where the reporters just said, whatever is the truth. Didn't happen with Cal Exit. I'll allow you to think about why that is. I'm certainly not going to go down conspiracy lane as a liberal. But so half of the population of California is interested in this. And when we look at that poll, the polls didn't take in the accurate amount of the Latino vote. So they undercut the amount of Latinos in both polls. When you do that and you have the polls match the amount of Latinos that live in California, the percentage of Californians open to discussing secession jumps to 51 to 52%.
Boy.
Nobody brings that up in the news. Nobody brings up how the polls don't actually match the demographic balance that we've achieved here in California. And they won't even bring up that 15.5 to 17% difference. So that tells me we can win. When the media just outright omits facts that are based on references, tells me they're scared. And when they're scared, that tells me people in power know this could actually happen. Don't let Californians know that basically half or just over half were talking about this. Infer instead, without proof, that 2/3 were against it. So that's what we're about. Now, my particular history, just to round it out, sorry for being a little,
no, fine.
Take your time. Stream of consciousness.
We like not working.
I started. I started the idea when I published the book California's Next Century in 2011. I traveled to 40 cities across California throughout 2012. If you go to YouTube and type in Marcus Ruiz Evans, you'll see me speaking at 40 different California cities throughout the north, south, interior, rural parts, the conservative parts. Got the same result as I did on the coastal parts. Then I found an official publisher in 2012. California's Next Century was published. Reporter Tom Elias, who's the reporter that got former California Governor Gray Davis fired and started the recall election that put Arnold Schwarzenegger in. Tom Elias, who's able to cause major changes in California, saw that published book and wrote the first article on CalExit in 2013. From there, other people found me, and we created Sovereign California in 2014 to oppose Tim Draper's plan to split California up. We received as much media attention, being 5 guys with a dot matrix laser beam printer, as a political consultant company with $200,000 in their budget and a variety of ex-Republican and ex-Democratic aides helping them. And so he said, why is it that 5 people who are complete amateurs are able to get as much press as a group full of politicos and former advisors with a couple $100,000 in their budget, opposing Tim Draper's original plan to split California up into 6 states? And all we come up with was, we had a different message. Sovereign California, which became Yes California later, said California's a nation. That was our whole thing. Don't split up California. We're a nation. If you go to Ballotopedia and type in 6 states, you'll see Sovereign California there. So I always like to bring that up to show people this was a long time coming. We've been at this when Obama was around. This is not just a reaction to Trump. We had about 10,000 members, and we were in the LA Times twice, San Francisco Chronicle, Sacramento Bay Area, and LA TV before Trump was ever elected. Okay, so this is not just a reaction to Trump. We were doing this when the good president was around. I'll stop there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a question I was going to ask as well, because one of the reasons I'm so impressed with our Marcus here is he's consistent. When President Trump was elected, and for purposes of clarification, we are no apologists. We call balls and strikes. We are not party partisans here, in case anybody's new and doesn't know that. No, but I heard somebody being interviewed after the 2016 elections and secession in California no longer, now with some of these people, was a racist issue of Southerners seeking to maintain their slave state status. What he says was, no, unlike the others who wanted to secede, this is about freedom. And when we get a new president, we'll come back. Well, that's not consistent. That's party partisanship. That's going to really shake things up, not for the, to the detriment of everybody, but if we can be consistent. And he recognizes the issue of smaller government and California's sovereignty. That's what's impressive to me. And that's how we can come together and work for a common cause, because essentially we have 2 groups here. And I believe Walter Williams wrote an article about this too. We have those that wish to be left alone, and those that wish to live under the auspices of a very large, draconian general government. And where we fit in here within the left-right paradigm is we can come together and agree that we are in the former group. Now, how California chooses to govern itself within their sovereign state, do they in turn want to be a big government for their own citizens and the people that, by the way, elected them? They're welcome to it. They have our complete support. So the intellectual consistency and all of us coming together from these various coalitions, be it left, right, evangelical Christians, secularists, this is the common message. And this is why I think we've got on the radar of Think Progress on CNN. When we talk about principles of federalism, it scares them, because as we know, the media is really just an unofficial arm of the Democrat Party. Gone are the days of independent, unbiased reporting. And Marcus, what I say on the air frequently is we are being kept uh, the public is being misinformed, what I call a trifecta of evil. And the first branch of that is the government, the media, and the education system. The latter two are kept in line by the former with regards to grant funding, licensing, regulation. They've all got to march the party line because it benefits them and it benefits the government, who is going to stay in power if they can keep people like us marginalized, discredited, labeled as haters and extremists. But when we come together across ideological beliefs, that's going to be scary. And Mark, you and I had to talk about this weekend and how we might go forward. And I've been doing a lot of thinking, we're really opening up ourselves here to some trouble. Maybe it could be something as innocuous or as much of a hassle as it would be IRS audits, or it could be something far more nefarious. We'll have to see, but that's not that. I think we owe it to future generations to do what we can to decentralize and at least inform people. I don't think it will happen in our lifetime. I hope it does. But to lay this groundwork of irrefutable, ironclad history and facts while we still can, and then work from there.
Marcus, I want to open up a line of discussion here that you and I have talked a good bit about here the last since we left the conference, and it's this notion of propaganda and its effectiveness at keeping us apart from one another. So as you and I discussed, and you mentioned even during your presentation at Abbeville, you came to the conference with a bit of trepidation. Some of your advisors had told you not to come. There was some real concern there. Well, we get the same thing on our side as well. If you I don't even like applying the left-right paradigm to our discussion. I like applying friend-friend. In keeping with Thomas Jefferson's admonition, peaceful commerce and honest friendship with all, entangling alliances with none. I like to look at you as a friend. But on our side of the equation, we've got 12, 14 hours of radio programming every day that tells me to hate you. And I don't know where your sources are, but it's similar. Yet we get into a room together, and what happens, Marcus? You're applauded.
We get along.
Yes.
Yeah, we get along. We just say, hey, we think differently. Let's move forward.
And this isn't this the power of and who's the propaganda protecting in this scenario we're talking about? The propaganda is there for a purpose. It's there to keep us separate. But why are they wanting to keep us separate? Is the real question, isn't it?
Can I jump in on this one, because propaganda is something I know?
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Greg.
You can talk politics all day long, and I'll just sit there and smile and nod and wave with everybody. But when you talk propaganda, that's something that I learned a lot of in the defense industry, and especially at the National Security Agency. So,
hey, Greg, why don't you stop real quick and give your background so Marcus knows kind of who you are?
Okay, I am a recovering signals intelligence officer. I made my way out of the National Security Agency about 8 years ago. I spent most of my military career in what we would call the black world. And those are all those special programs that are funded with money that doesn't exist, i.e. the $732 hammer.
Yeah.
The hammer costs $3, and the rest of the money goes to fund such and such a program. So I did program protection and a whole bunch of other things in that world. I ran counterintelligence offices for Army Research Laboratories, was a medical officer with the Army, and was also started out as a good old infantry guy back in the day, back 4 decades ago now. So
yeah, right. Old man.
It's been don't talk to me about wearing hats at McDonald's. So it's been a long trip to finally come out of there. But so when we're talking about propaganda, what you're talking about in this situation is something we call binary opposition. And binary opposition is based in the concept that there are only two ways to go, i.e. Democrat, Republican. If you look at a third party, you're immediately wasting your time, your effort, your vote, or anything outside the consideration of the two options that you're given. This helps both sides of the equation in power. It helps both the Republicans and the Democrats by only focusing on those two options. It excludes the third option, the fourth option, or any other consideration of any other type of government in this situation whatsoever. So the whole concept of secession is completely off the table when you're talking binary opposition. Binary opposition also identifies that one side is inherently better, either in moral terms or specific logical terms, than the other side, and you should not consider the other side by any means whatsoever, up to the point of argument and or violence if necessary. Depends upon how high you want to scale the opposition to the concept. So let's just take the we're not going to give granny health care concept. Either we give granny health care or we don't give granny health care. Well, there's two ways to look at it. Okay, on one side, you have the Republican concept that, well, I'm not going to say Republican anymore because it's really not a Republican concept. They manage big government better. That's what Republicans do. But back in the day, I'd say 100 years ago, Republicans would have said that you're supposed to have granny get taken care of by the family, the nuclear family, and if you couldn't afford health care, most doctors at that time were interested and willing to allow for the free treatment of granny. That's not the truth today. That's not happening today. Granny doesn't get treated for free anymore because of the exorbitant number of lawsuits that are happening. And there's a reason why lawsuits are introduced into this equation also, to not allow for the free treatment. It's very convoluted, but propaganda-wise, you're talking about binary opposition here. You only have a choice of A or B. If you choose A, if you're a Democrat and you choose Republican, then you are a bad person. If you're a Republican and you choose Democrat, you're a bad person.
And Greg, I'm going to interrupt real quick there because I think that is really a central part of this discussion, and why I think it's important for all of our listeners, whether it's on your side of the equation, the binary equation, Marcus, or our side. We have been fed a line that has kept us thinking this way, that there are only two options. This is what comes from, and Marcus, tell me if you hear this on your side. On our side of the equation, here's what we hear all the time. This comes from the Rush Limbaughs, the Sean Hannity's, Mark Levin's, all these guys. They'll say, if you don't vote for Republican X, and you vote Libertarian, or you don't vote at all, you don't participate, you're essentially casting half a vote for your opponent. Is that some of the messaging that comes out of the liberal side as well, that if you don't vote for, let's say, the Democrat candidate, then you're throwing your vote away, or you're actually, even worse, you're casting half a vote towards the people who you should be hating? Do you see that same thing on your side of the equation?
All the time. All the time. Here in California, it was especially potent with the 2016 election. What's not reported is that California was not Hillary Clinton territory. It was Bernie Sanders territory.
Yeah.
Sanders would have won the primary. Californians loved Bernie Sanders. He would have easily taken the primary here, except for something known as the crossover ballot controversy, which the Sanders people sued the Democratic Party over. So what happened was, if you're a Democrat and you wanted to vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary because he was technically originally an independent, you couldn't just write his name in, nor was his name printed. You had to specifically ask your county registrar of voters for what's called a crossover ballot. And if you didn't use the exact phrase crossover ballot with your voter registrar person, they would not inform you that you needed to do that. Even if you asked for help and said, I want to vote for Bernie Sanders, they were instructed to tell you nothing, according to California law. You had to know the phrase to ask. You had to have the crossover in order to make it, or you could not cast a vote for Bernie Sanders at all. And then it turns into, oh, well, Hillary Clinton swept California. No, she didn't. And also, before the primaries,
amazing,
he outright all Californians by saying, well, I got the votes to win even if I lose California. And that was kind of an angry reaction on her part to the Bernie Sanders people. Additionally, here in California, we still have the Sanders people. They tried to take over the California Democratic Party with Kimberly Ellis, an African-American woman, very progressive, Bay Area, lots of liberal credentials. And the vote between her and the old school Democrat who stayed in charge of the California Democratic Party came down to like 5 votes,
wow,
which were counted in a secret room that nobody could see. Talk to any Bernie Sanders people at all. When we talk about how Trump doesn't play fair and they rig the elections, here in California, if you talk to Bernie Sanders people, they're like, oh, like how the California Democratic Party did? Yeah, no, we've seen that before. You will not see this at all. You will not see this in the news at all.
No.
You will see something. There's a progressive wing because of Sanders. You won't see that at all. You also won't see the California delegation at the Democratic Party nomination for Clinton booing so loud they used white noise to drown them out, because the majority of the California Democrats to the Democratic Party nomination ceremony thought the election was rigged against them, against Bernie Sanders, and so loudly that they were white noised out. And then Sarah Silverman criticized them live on public television and said, "You guys are ridiculous." You won't see that covered. So I guess everything's cool and democracy works, and what you're talking about is just on the right. Doesn't happen on the left ever.
So
because
this is interesting. This is the same concept. This is called contrary destruction. This is another propaganda technique that we use. What's that?
I love the fact you know these terms. I'm just going to go with the common layman's rigged election, not real democracy.
Well, these are the reason I know them is because they're all planned.
And I ran. So I just love watching the news where they talk about how here's these non-democracies messing with America's democracy. I go, Americans mess with American democracy. When are they going to be brought up in the news? When is that going to be covered?
Yeah, you won't hear that.
Death of by our own hand, not a foreigner. Let's get that real clear.
And this is why I wanted to have this kind of conversation, Marcus and Suzanne and Greg, because the people listening need to understand that we have actually been brainwashed. We have actually been propagandized into believing this. They have Bernie Sanders problems on their side. Do you remember we had Ron Paul problems on our side? Because who did it insulate? It insulated the sociopaths, I call in Washington, D.C., because both were, in a weird kind of way, considerable change agents. And so you can't have a real change agent. You have to have a status quo that propagates and continues the status quo. So we end up with this kind of weird shared concern that we have, which actually, Marcus, binds us together. We don't want our lives to be governed that way. We don't want to have the megalomaniacs in Washington insulated from the criticism they rightfully deserve for pulling off the shenanigans that they do. I mean, my gosh, if you don't know a term, crossover ballot, your vote doesn't, and this is a banana republic. That's what that ends up being. It just protects those in power. So this is an important discussion. This is why Suzanne and I talked about in the show for quite some time. We don't really get into nuanced constitutional discussions and things like that because none of that matters. It just is propaganda to continue the status quo. These are the kinds of conversations we need to have because they expose the problem. They don't just talk about continuing the problem. When we hear, if you're a Californian and you haven't memorized a term, that suddenly your vote now has been disenfranchised, and we're supposed to be excited about this form of government? Are you kidding me? It's time, folks, that we deal with truth in this equation and not allow the megalomaniacs, the sociopaths up there in Washington to dictate really how you choose things. I watched the movie the other night, Suzanne, Creepy Line you told me about. Oh my gosh. The manipulation.
Everybody needs to see that. Everybody needs to see that. And after seeing that movie, I almost thought, I'm up here in the mountains living a really great life. Maybe I should just hang it up, because ultimately the people that control our ability, the people that control our ability to get the message out are the ones that can just pull the lights, pull the switch right away. Speaking of the third party option in here in our senatorial race, we had a couple. We had a candidate from the Constitution Party. We had a libertarian candidate, Craig Bowden. I was his constitutional policy advisor. And we had a great candidate from the Republican Party that lost out in the primary to Mitt Romney. And I was told, as somebody in Utah, look, you got to get Mitt Romney in because Supreme Court justices are at stake. Not only that, but federal judiciary appointments are at stake. And again, why do I have to sacrifice my principles to keep in power an entity that, first of all, doesn't represent me, doesn't care about me, but somehow it has the letter R next to it and it's going to make it okay? Well, the only way to get this country back is by taking back the federal judiciary. That is the antithesis upon which we were founded. This is why principles such as secession and nullification, even though we try to get away from constitutional principles, we're still having to deal with people that cling to the holy parchment, like Linus held on to his security blanket. And we have to let them know that if you cannot let that go, we can talk within that 3x5 index card of allowable opinion. I have to quote Tom Woods for that. But again, we can still venture off there, stay within the parameters of this Constitution. Secession was legal, continues to be legal. Nullification is absolutely legal and acceptable. The Department of Homeland Security has a master's course. Our friend Rick Barrett took it. And they told him there's a new federalism out here right now where we can get around the principles of the state sovereignty by holding grant blocks over their head or withholding them as we see fit and how it conforms to their compliance. Speaking of propaganda, do you know today marks the anniversary of the Gettysburg Address? Our good friend Dave Benner posted an article about that. And once upon a time, ladies and gentlemen, I believed that he was the greatest president of all time. The first time I ever heard of him, I was a little girl, and my grandfather, whom I worshiped, asked if I had heard of him. And I said, no. How could you not have heard of him? He freed the slaves. And I thought, well, I don't know what slaves he's talking about. That has to be a good thing, though. And as I grew up saying the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation, indivisible, we were never founded upon those principles. We go on and on and on about that. And then I started realizing as I did some work, thanks to expanding my horizons from the people I was meeting on social media and getting to read authors and historians that I'd never come across, I realized, well, maybe he didn't do this to free the slaves. But guess what? He saved the Union. And then our good friend Carl Jones appealed to my lawyerly characteristics by explaining, look, if secession was illegal, why do you think Jefferson Davis was released from custody after 2 years? Because a trial attorney would get hold of the historical records, argue it, and it would become public that all of a sudden secession was legal. The South was correct in what they did. They had every justification, every legal means by which to do so. The one who did break the law was patron saint Lincoln. And that's the type of sacred cow that we slay here. And that's what people have to understand, the magnitude of the lies they tell us to keep themselves in power. That is Democrats. That is Republican. If Mitt Romney had lost the vote and we had a Democrat senator, well, we are sending a Democrat to Congress. We're sending a progressive. He's just not a Democrat. And if we had just ignored that, we're just part of the problem. So we have to understand. I was completely comfortable voting for a third-party candidate. I'm not going to sacrifice my principles and hold my nose and vote anymore.
Marcus, let me ask you a question. So you're making the contention now that California has the right to be an independent nation. Tell me your basis for that. Now, cover a broad range, both political and economic. Why you guys think you can do this, and why you actually feel kind of morally obligated to do this.
Okay, I'll give the range. So the first part I'll say is that basically, I'll talk in common language, and then I'll use some academic terms to back it up to show this is actually based on real research. So just for people to understand, if you have the money, you can do whatever you want. If the banks are too big to fail, certain countries are too big to fail. The global economic system now, since the 1990s and the fall of the Berlin Wall, particularly through the administration of Bill Clinton, linked all currency around the planet. So every, I think, hour, all of the wealth of the world travels around the entire planet. Nobody actually owns their own money. It's all computer bank accounts. It's constantly being moved. So I think the entire currency of the planet travels around the earth maybe 20 times a day or 100 times. People don't realize that at certain points, American money is in Russia, Iran, countries that perhaps Americans say, we don't do business. Well, technically, the global financial system says you do. People don't pay attention to the fact that even America's enemies have to use the US dollar to trade between themselves. So people don't know that. They don't know how money works. Basically, long story short, California is the world's 5th largest economy. The top 10 economies, maybe you can say the top 17, get to do whatever they want, make up whatever rules they want, and everybody else is just going to deal with it because they're frankly too big to cut out. I mean, imagine if England literally disappeared. There would be recession for everybody in the world. Brexit, they said, was going to destroy England. It would cut it off. Its economy would collapse. The British pound, blah, blah, blah. None of that happened. I mean, the pound did take a pounding, but it came back. And nobody in Europe's talking about, we'll not do business with England. In fact, I looked at the new agreement between May and the EU, and it's saying, oh, you're going to get your separate currency union and your separate trade union. Everything the British wanted, they're going to get. The news isn't pointing that out. They're going, oh, well, the English had to give up this and they had to get, yeah, but they got what they wanted. They said, we wanted to redo our negotiation just for ourselves. The EU is going to give it to them. I mean, that's basically what's going on. Why? Because they have too much money. You're a poor country, you can't do it. Big country, you can. California is the world's 5th largest economy. G20, G8, et cetera, would qualify for those. So it can do these sorts of things. Additionally, California already has the key determinant under international law to become a nation. So the only thing that requires you to become a nation is that a recognized nation recognizes you. So a Russia, a China, a Brazil, a India says, I see you, and I feel that you're a nation. The more nations you have saying that, you get to be a nation. In fact, the American federal Supreme Court, the highest determiner of law in America, backed that up with the Kosovo decision. America just declared Kosovo a country. Didn't match any patterns for making a nation, kind of violated international law, but they just felt like doing it. And the Supreme Court says, well, if the president of America declares any country a country, they're a country. End of story. You don't need approval of Congress. We don't need international law to back that up. That's just how it is. So American legal precedent, and I ask everybody to look at Professor Bridget Coggins, based out of here in California, who wrote a book on this. And, you know, international recognition is just based upon power. Somebody really powerful says your country, end of story. So because of those reasons, California can do this. We're not focusing on that because it's kind of long-winded to explain, and somebody will come back going, that's not legal, blah, blah, blah. So what we in CalExit have focused on is the Supreme Court decision, Texas versus White. Now, I want to be clear. We're not saying this is the only reason you can secede. We're not saying this is the only legal path to secession. We're saying that here in California, they don't understand the early legal documents of America. They don't understand the concept of nullification. They aren't going to listen to John C. Calhoun and what he was talking about. They are trained to listen to the law. So to simply skip a 3-hour wasted conversation to go, well, technically the federal Supreme Court said after the Civil War in Texas versus White, you can secede with permission, AKA consent to the states. It's in there. That's a real case. Deal with it. And I got to say, the liberal media 2 years ago said we were liars. Then a year ago goes, well, I guess that case exists. And then 6 months ago, we're very proud of this. because we beat them down. They actually got the dean of the Constitutional Center at the UC Berkeley to admit, okay, I guess Texas versus White exists, and I guess it does say consent to the states, and I guess they've been saying that, and that's all true, but it quotes probably doesn't mean what they're saying. Now, that's a dean of the Constitution Center, one of the world's best legal universities, saying, I'm guessing what it means, and it probably doesn't mean that. Why don't you say it definitively doesn't mean that? If you're sure that we're crazy and don't know what we're talking about, you're a dean of a constitutional legal center. Why not come out and say consent to the states doesn't mean permission of Congress? It means the amendment process definitively. You won't say it because you don't know.
Mm-hmm. Marcus, this is what's exciting about, and you guys actually kind of have figured out how to package the whole deal, because money does actually talk. One of the things that I do down here, when I think about the 14 states I've identified that should together leave and form a confederation, a federation, however they wanted to form themselves, they would start out with a $5.2 trillion GDP, making them the third most powerful economy in the world. They would have all the deep water ports they need. They would have all the agriculture, all the energy they need. Because I hear this, you might hear it as well. You guys are a net donor state to the federal government. So in actuality, if you guys left, there would be a big loss to the federal government, because you guys donate more than you receive back. That's a powerful argument for people who are terrified that without Washington money, we're going to die. I hear this on my side a lot, Marcus. A lot of people want to entertain the idea, but inevitably it comes back to, well, what will happen to me financially? Is this going to hurt me financially? Am I going to be in worse shape financially if you yahoos pull this off? How do you run into those same concerns in California, that at some very personal level, they're afraid economically? Yeah,
well, that's why nobody's quit the movement who's in it, because we've debated people in California who were against this. And 95% of the time, their pivotal argument is ignorance. It's just not true. They'll say, well, it's not legal. Did you know about Texas versus White? No, I didn't know that. Okay. The federal government will cut off money. Did you know that we make more money than they give us? No, I didn't know that. Or that's not true. I don't believe you no matter what you say. That's not true. Or I don't care. You say Texas versus White exists. I'm sure it doesn't. Obama never brought that up when he said Texas can't secede. I don't see that on any federal reports. CNN doesn't talk about it. So you must be lying. And no, I'm not going to take 30 seconds of my own time to look it up on Google. I'm just going to believe what the experts tell me. So we have lost a lot of support to BS arguments and people who like to act like intellectual ostriches, to borrow the, I guess, quasi-non-scientific term. The other one was the Colorado River is going to get cut off. And we said, well, hey, then America's not going to eat 90% of the vegetables and fruits they like to eat and will starve. They're probably not going to do that. Additionally, we're not talking about cutting off trade. We want to trade. People want to travel back and forth, intermarry. Great, do it. But Canada gets to be a separate country. They have great relations with America. Why can't we do the same thing? These are our main arguments. We deal with a lot of BS, a lot of ignorance, a lot of people who are sure that they're right and their main argument is wrong. And one of the biggest ones that we dealt with was, and that's how we all met. I mean, that's why Yes California and CalExit was invited to the Abbeville Institute Conference on Secession and Nullification. We were told, and the newspaper here in California routinely prints, this is a pipe dream because you'll never get the votes. Americans will never vote for you to go. They will never let you go. They have an emotional image of the flag and the map of the states, and it'll never happen. So we started holding conference calls with conservatives and asking, you know, do you come from Mississippi or Tennessee or Virginia, and are you saying that in your neighborhood you think regular people would be weeping uncontrollably in the states and crying and say, don't let California go, we can never get over this, I'll never vote for them to go if they leave, I'm going to join the military myself to fight to get them back? And what we found on 4 different conference calls with well-respected conservative leaders, like the president of Mises and the president of Abbeville, was no, you guys are crazy. Who's saying this? That's based on nothing. Professor Livingston of the Abbeville Institute invited us to that conference. And Friday night and Saturday night, I can't wait for the Saturday video to come out. My God, the media lies sometimes, and that's really going to spank them hard. I'm looking forward to that. Friday night, Saturday night, I asked the crowd, am I wrong? You represent 15 different states. Would you be emotionally upset if California leave? Would you never respect our vote? Would you force us back in? And people laughed. They laughed at that idea. That's one of the things many Californians don't support Calexit, is because they think the opposite's true. CNN, MSNBC, other liberals, LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle have told them Americans will never let this vote go. End of story. Well, we actually talked to Americans, and we're getting a completely different picture. And we've done it in those conference calls right now. This conference, we did it at the Abbeville Institute, 2 different nights. I understand that America may lose money, but I also understand that American elections are not based upon common sense and logic and balance sheets and detailed policy comparisons. They're based upon emotion. And if a majority of the people say, I'm sick and tired of crazy ideas like banning plastic bags, I'm sick and tired of us yelling and screaming at each other, and it really seems to be California's pushing that, which we are. I love California. I know who we are. I don't agree with everything my fellow Californians do. I will never turn on them, but not the way I would handle it. But I also know who we are and what we're doing. We had our senator use the F word to refer to the other party while in Senate. That doesn't happen. She also suggested to shoot Donald Trump in the head on television. So that's pretty extreme. I wouldn't do that. But Harris told a complicated joke about executing him with a gun to the back of his head. Yes, she did that live on television. No, she was not criticized by anybody. So we're already at the point where it ain't working, and we're going to go to a civil war. Hillary Clinton said right before she announced that she's going to run again in 2020 that there's no point being civil with the other side until you're able to control them. Wow. Wow. Well, that's pretty much the death of democracy.
So this is Marcus. This is what you, again, this is another propaganda technique. I know you're not surprised to hear that. This is called pathological progressivism, and it has nothing to do with being conservative or progressive. But as one lie fails and has been disproved, the focus is moved to the next lie. In order to maintain control of the people, you have to keep them off balance. So if you disprove something by stating, okay, 1868, Texas versus White, this is what happened, well, that argument is immediately lost once the truth comes out, and another lie has to be readied and put into place in order to maintain a disbalance in the people so that they don't know exactly what the truth is, and you can lead them by being the person on whatever news outlet it is, if it's Fox or CNN or whatever it's going to be. Those people are now they're still the experts, and they're still the people that you go to, even though you've disproven the previous lie. They'll move on to the next one and keep people in this kind of a limbo state.
I think also the message we had at the symposium was really one of peace and trying to avert. I think, Marcus, you told me some statistics on searches for the Civil War and how they have ramped up on the internet and how people are talking about it more and more. One of the speakers was showing pictures of Mount St. Helens, that for some time there were warnings that that mountain was going to blow its top. We're seeing these warnings right now. People are talking about civil war. We're saying it doesn't have to be this way. And you and I had a conversation out in the hallway, Marcus, where forget Texas, you don't need the consent of the other states, but you're working with these parameters, within these parameters where people are looking to what the Supreme Court guidance is. So I applaud the wisdom of actually getting a coalition together of representatives in other states, even passing referendums. It's not needed, but it just shows that, yes, this is something that would promote liberty for all of us. If a state wants to criminalize the murder of a human baby. If a state wants to say gay marriage is the law of the land, California actually said we don't want it in Prop 8. A federal judiciary came in there and usurped the will of the voters. This is the issue. We had a little bit of mini nullification attempt out here in Utah with the school district saying, you know, we don't think Common Core is in the best interest of our children. Then when it came down to what were we talking about a few minutes ago? The money. Show me the money. When it became apparent that if they seceded from the Common Core system, they were going to lose their what? Their federal funding. All of a sudden now, well, we really can't go without that money because we really do want the best education for the children. But if you go back full circle, the whole point of getting out of Common Core was the benefit of the children. These federal grant dollars are how they keep us together. If California secedes, they're not going anywhere. Do you guys have some major chainsaw where you're going to cut yourselves off from California and paddle away and hang out with your
they don't know. They're not going to. I'll cover this. The chainsaw. No. Right. No, I'm going to tell them there's no chainsaw. There is no chainsaw that you speak of.
Now, we have our bulldozers. Mark talks about 10,000. We want to push DC in, but America is more than its government. What I have seen going around, driving around this continental land mass, the people is what makes us America. Just like the people is what makes the church. It's not the buildings. It's not the temples to national government in Washington, D.C. It's the people that meet face to face on the ground, that have conversations, that embrace each other, notwithstanding their ideological differences, that can still come together. We can be united and not agree if political legislation, controlling laws emanating from Washington, D.C. are not forced down upon us. Every single issue is of national contention.
Yeah.
Don't want to live under those circumstances. Go ahead.
I agree.
Oh, okay.
No, this is interesting.
I agree with everything you said.
This is very interesting because, you know, there's a word that floats around now that's become quite popular, a buzz term called tolerance. We're supposed to be tolerant of each other. And when you follow the ideology of the word, you find that in the 1700s, 1800s, the word meant mutual respect for one another's beliefs. Now it's transitioned into, now you have to accept and embrace my belief system. Well, when you apply that into a political realm, you end up with, like Suzanne said, everything becomes national contention then. Whether it's abortion, whether it's gay marriage, whether it's spending, education, doesn't matter what it is, suddenly you have to tolerate my belief system. And what I mean by tolerant is you have to embrace it. The Republicans do it, the Democrats do it. At a national level, monolithic, affecting all 320 million people. And who possibly could think that's going to end well? It doesn't end well. So the best ending is a peaceful political divorce. We're all familiar with divorce. Half of the country has experienced some level of divorce in their families. They know that many, many times people will tell you it de-escalated the tension. It took away the sore spot that was there. Now, as I told you, I'm a former pastor, and so I would counsel in the context of marriage, not divorcing. But I also am not blind. I recognize there are times when I've had a woman sitting in my office or talking to a woman who's been physically abused, I'm telling her to get out of that thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's dangerous for you to stay there. And we're in that kind of place now. Our abuser happens to be in the 10-mile square swampland we call Washington, D.C. I really believe that. They're the ones that are forcing us to stay together. And the tension isn't really between us. They're just fomenting tension between us. When the reality is we've become fast friends. This is how we really want to interact. We don't want to force you to embrace my beliefs using political power. And you don't want to, and I don't want to force you to embrace my beliefs using political power. That's a kind of a psychosis, a weird sickness that's gotten into us. And so having you on the show here, Mark, is showing the other side of the equation. I hope for every listener that's paying attention to this show today, as it gets circulated around via podcast, please look into this gentleman's eyes and understand he doesn't want to control you. That's not his objective. He's not trying to get power from Washington, D.C. and then force you against your will to do something. What he wants is a free California. They want to have their own identity. They want to refer to themselves as Californians. Marcus, I've heard you a couple of times now say in America, as if you're already separate. And I appreciate that you're already building that identity, right? That's why you say things like that, right? Back in America.
Yeah, that's it. I can't say I appreciate that endorsement a lot. It means a lot. As I said at the speech, the first thing they're going to do when you're successful is not assassinate you. It's character assassinate you. Yeah. They're going to claim you're this or that and get people to not even look at you. And to have somebody who's conservative talk about, yeah, these people are liberal, but you can work with them. I can't thank you enough for that endorsement. That is the reason why CalExit launched Consent to the States, why we did the conference calls with conservative leaders, which you can see on our Facebook page, why we went to that Abbeville Institute, and why I'm here at this conference to actually prove the point. Like, we can work together. And if Texas versus White is correct, and you need consent to the states to leave and not an amendment process, then that means that we're looking at a simple 51% vote of Congress for any state to leave. California was forced to become American by a 51% vote of Congress. It wasn't 2/3.
Interesting.
It was 51%. So why can't it be 51% to go? And when we have the dean of the Constitutional Center of one of the best law schools in America saying it probably doesn't know that, instead of I definitively know it doesn't mean that, tells me we've got a case. And as I've always said, let's take it to the Supreme Court. In America, we have what's called combative law. So you have two different lawyers from two different sides. It doesn't matter what a professor says. It only matters what a court says. The law means what a court rules that it means, and the highest court. So if consent to the states in Texas versus White means an amendment process and not a simple majority vote, someone needs to define that. And the only people that can do it are the American Federal Supreme Court. I welcome them revisiting it, because think about that. America looks at the topic of secession again. Everybody's going to be talking about secession. Even if the Supreme Court goes, no, it's the same as an amendment process, it's 2/3, it's not 51%. The fact that the Supreme Court, 100 plus 200 years after the Civil War between the states, had to revisit the issue, like I said in my speech at Abbeville, the more you talk about it, the more people think about it. The more you just have that word out there, the more people entertain the idea it can happen. So if we're wrong, let's take it to the Supreme Court. They're the only ones that can say it's not 51% and 2/3. We think it's 51%. And consent to the states is there in Texas versus White. And that is the only Supreme Court case on secession at all. And the Constitution says you must listen to the Supreme Court on all legal disputes. And that court case, in fact, came after the Civil War. So let's acknowledge that. Let's be adults, and let's move forward and have an actual debate. I mean, if we're wrong, call us out. Don't play little tricks like the court case doesn't exist and that phrase isn't there and these people aren't lawyers. Don't listen to them. Ridiculous little games. I mean, shouldn't a democracy actually have adult conversation to be functioning?
Let me ask you something, Marcus, because we've seen that the Supreme Court has been an absolute abysmal failure when it comes to going against the power and control of the general government. And that's why I argue all the time it's going to be misguided in the long run to rely on what they say on this issue. And we're going to run out of time. But I think what we need to consider for next time is, let's say we go through this process, the discussion gets elevated all the way to the highest court in the land, and they rule against you. And they say unequivocally, once and for all, there is no secession. Forget the little leeway we granted you in Texas v. White, which, by the way, I will say, because I've got to get the record straight for our listeners, it is historically inaccurate. 3 states reserved the right to secede when they ratified the Constitution: New York, Rhode Island, and Virginia. that reservation applied to all the states under the equal footing doctrine. You guys, if the Supreme Court goes against you, it changes nothing. You still have every legal right to secede. I don't care what the Black Robe Messiahs say. I will still support you. Greg will support you. Jeff will support you. Mark, I know, will support you. We are out of time. Want to thank you, Cal Exit, Marcus, Ruiz, Evan, Junk Bond. Mark, goodbye. Jeff, thank you very much for producing the show. I'm Suzanne Sherman. This has been the Mark and Suzanne Show, revolutionizing radio here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.